Dear listeners, welcome to Australia podcast Scientist on Stage, a podcast that shines light on the human being behind the scientist. A meaningful conversation with the scientist about their own journey, about logic and rationality, and the hidden emotions behind that rationality. These are their authentic stories. Our guest is Claudia Ylla Arbós, flood expert and working on climate adaptation in France. What does it mean to have an impact? Can we make an impact even though we are not in a decision making position? And how do we find fulfillment from the work we do? Let's find out together with Claudia. Claudia, what a pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here.
Tell us first what you do, who you are. What does impact mean for you, and how do you yourself as an action feel I'm taking now an action that will have an impact, what that is?
Lovely. I've thought about this throughout my entire life, I would almost say, because I am part of this group of people that at some point thought I want to change the world.
Make the world a better place.
Yes. Naive old little being. But I've grown up with this idea. I think my parents had mission-oriented jobs. My mom is a doctor. My dad worked on NGOs for the longest time. So in a way, I've grown up with this. Fine. At some point, I believe to make an impact, I need to do great things, big things, meaning impact is something you measure by the size of the people affected or the gravity of the problem you tackle. I used to believe impact was measured by the greatness and the size and the amount of people impacted of what you did. And with time, this idea has certainly changed. I am in a place that aims to have impact. I'm in a place that claims to work for impact. And I believe the way I measure impact now is very different. I actually measure impact now incrementally, if I'm allowed to say that word. Before I thought I had to do great things, whatever that means. And now I believe if I have brought a new idea to a person, that is impact for me. I don't even have the ambition to bring 10 ideas to them, and I start with one now and then. Maybe yes, maybe not, but the way I think of it, and precisely because of the position that I have, which is a science position in a non-scientific company, I will work with a lot of people that need to take decisions based on science, but that do not have a scientific background. Which means on one hand, if you think about it, when these types of decisions have been taken over time without science teams, I find that impressive, also terrifying. But it also means that now that we're starting to do things differently, it means that I can tell to a person, look, these results that you're seeing here, these flood maps that you're seeing here, they come from a model. A model is this. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. This is uncertainty. Uncertainty means this. All these things sound very, very basic for a scientist, because that's your day-to-day. That's the bread and butter of your work. But for people that have had no exposure to this whatsoever, the increment is huge. They went from knowing nothing to thinking, there's a model, there's uncertainty. You could say that this is just a new idea. The size of it is tiny. It's just a couple sentences from me. But they've planted a seed onto the other person. I feel like I've enlarged their perception of the world, and I think that they can now decide to use this or not. They can ignore my information or not, but the information is there now.
You see that as a role of the scientist, to be able to generate knowledge, information, support the decision making. But now you're saying, if you take my decision on my insights to take the decision, that's okay or not?
Well, I think you have to follow my insights, but I accept that it is not my role anymore to take the decision if I am not in the decision-making position. But I do take as my responsibility to give you the information and to make clear that this information is important. And it is hard sometimes to accept that I am not in the decision-making position, or it is hard to accept that people will decide not to use my information to make a decision. But I will have shared that information, and that part I do think is my responsibility. I also think it's a responsibility of scientists. I will go even further and say that a conviction that I have is that, like, if your science stays in your little cubicle in your office, it's literally useless.
In the ivory tower.
Yeah, I do think it's literally useless. And I think so much time and money, if you want, and effort goes into this, but if it stays closed, it's useless. And I guess fine if that's what you want, but I don't think so, for one. And for two, since you are the person that did this work, since you are the person that understood this, yes, it's like, it's part of the work. It's like completing that work includes bringing this out.
So it's not sufficient to have an idea, to do a calculation in your head or behind the computer, share that within your community, but bring that knowledge to outside in order to take the right decisions. And then comes the interesting part on how we communicate that in a way that the right decision is taken.
I think that is crucial, and that's also something that I feel incredibly strongly about. Because in general, there's obviously exceptions, but in general, we like categories. We like saying, I am a scientist, or I am an economist, or I am whatever, a language letters person. And it's almost like if you're one, you cannot be the other, because scientists are nerds and geeks, and we don't know how to communicate, and we're awkward. And if we work in anything, management or economy, we know nothing, but we're charismatic and we know how to engage. And I, for one, refuse to believe that. For two, again, I think it's almost our duty on both sides. I think it's, it's not because you're a scientist that you cannot try to communicate your work, and it's not because you are in management that your brain is not capable of understanding the science. We don't ask to go at the same level. We don't ask the manager to get the deepest understanding of science. It's fine, they don't need to, but they can get somewhere. Their brain allows to grasp the conclusions. And for that to happen, the scientists can also go a bit further than they think they can and try to synthesize and explain the most relevant things. I would say that synthesizing is probably one of the hardest things to do. We don't need, when we ask about communicating science, we don't need to say everything we've done, all the details, what works, what doesn't, all the procedure. Most people will not care about the details, and that's fine. I don't think they are important in terms of, bringing this to decision making, etc., etc. But it's part of the job precisely to understand, okay, out of this huge body of work, out of these 4 years of work, what are the 3 single most important things that I did? I think knowing that and being able to formulate that is part of your job. Because then someone else will need to use that information to take a decision, and if you did not synthesize that properly, the person that will take your conclusions but did not do the work might misuse it.
So what you are saying, that it's also our responsibility, and it is as important what we do and the content, and go deeper into that to understand, to find a solution for a problem, but it's as important to be able to communicate that to the rest of the world, because otherwise the work that we do is not having the impact that we would like to have.
Yes, and by that I don't mean that Because nowadays there will also be the complaint that you need to do it all, you need to be a scientist, but also you need to be a great communicator and a YouTuber. But to have the capacity to adapt your content to the audience. And that means discussing to understand their needs. And that means, I will come back to what I was saying earlier, what is obvious to me, it's not obvious to the other person. That works culturally or in your work. When you've been working for 6 years or 7 or 8 or 10, whatever, in something very specific, it's your day-to-day, it's almost impossible to understand or to believe that the other person does not understand a word that you use every day.
You said something at the beginning about it's scary to think that people took decision without maybe the scientific background. But at the same time, I'm wondering, maybe the world was less complex than the world we are right now. How do you feel about it, the complexity of the world around us, and how we scientists should or take a role, or maybe not even a scientist, as a human being?
I do believe the world is more complex now, but I will define this complexity by amount of information. And it is more complex now because the amount of stimulation that we have is huge and it comes from all directions. The amount of input that we get increases by the hour. And it's hard to make sense of all this information. So in that sense, I think complexity has increased over time. And because of that, it's ever more important to be able to discern, to be able to synthesize, to be able to say, okay, out of this huge pile of information, this is really the essential. And this is not. And sometimes it means I did all of this work, I spent all of this time, but out of all of this time, only this sentence is relevant. Fine. It's hard to do that, but it's important. And yet there's another side to this, which is we also bring this to the other extreme. We live in what I call the digest culture. It's like we refuse at this point to read more than 2 pages. What am I saying? 2 pages, to read more than like a paragraph. Headlines need to be punchy. Paper titles need to be catchy and sexy and like all of these things. And I am like, no, it's not entertainment. It's work, it's science, it's important things that we need, that we need to move forward. So we want a digest version of everything. And that's not necessarily helpful. I think that contributes to this culture of immediacy, that everything needs to be short and now and quick and easy. And that's not how life has ever worked. And I think it doesn't equip us for actual life issues and problems which are not immediate. Life is processes, be it personal, be it professional. Things take time, like it or not. But at the same time, we're flooded by information, we're flooded by all this speed, which goes directly opposite to this direction. It directly it makes us believe that problems can be solved instantly, that results can be achieved instantly, that impact can be achieved quickly. And that actually terrifies me, because then again it means we take decisions based on nothing. We take decisions based on misinterpretations. And then we have this mindset of, we do something, we will figure it out later. If not, we will fix it.
Or the scientists will fix it.
Yes.
Climate change. And energy transition.
And to some extent, there's something good about this, because sometimes scientists can have the opposite problem, which is nothing is ever good enough or perfect enough to be useful, to be actionable, and then we get stuck. So part of that is good, but not to the extreme that it is. I think when we, in this digest culture, we lose nuance, which is one of the realities, nuanced, like it or not, and we need to generalize because we need to make what we do actionable. But I think with climate adaptation, I think it's a very good example. We need global conclusions. We need solutions that are scalable and actionable, and if somebody needs to invest in them, they need to know that they will help a lot of people. But then climate adaptation, if anything, is local. So the solution that you apply, not even to this country, but to this neighborhood of this country, is not the same that you apply to the neighborhood 300 meters. And that's not to say you can only think locally and you can only think small scale. I think that is precisely to say you need to do everything, not one person, but we need to have both a big picture and a focus picture. And we need to build bridges in all directions, in large scale and small scale, in sciences and anything that's not sciences, in social and environmental and mathematics and physics. And we need to break silos. And that's hard and that takes time and it's inconvenient, so we don't do it. But I think never one single small piece of reality is the truth. And I guess maybe to circle back to all of this discussion, but when I think of, my path and what I do and what I want to do, I find meaning in being precisely in the middle of all of this. I find meaning in building these bridges. If I have built one bridge, to me that's impact. If I have brought science to someone that's not scientific, that's impact. If I have talked about local adaptation to someone that deals with a worldwide portfolio, that's impact. I think a grain of sand is impact.
The complexity then is not only the amount of information we receive, but also the complexity of the problems that we have to solve, both at the scale of globally, locally, and everything together and in between that. For you then, the impact is have meaning or find your meaning for what you do. That has a meaning, even though it's a small little puzzle in a big problem, complex problem.
I've always had big expectations of things, of people, of experiences. If I would go to a conference, if I would read a book, you have these great expectations that you need to take so much out of it. That if there's a solution to a problem, it's the solution that changes the world, that changes everything. And my mindset has changed dramatically about that. Now I will go to a conference. It's going to be 1 week. If I go back home with one idea, that was worth it. I read a book. If I like one sentence out of it and that one sentence makes me change my perspective on something, it was worth it. And that is also freeing, I realize, because I guess it also applies to me, myself, my work. Meaning, from my teenage dream of changing the world in which, you need to solve hunger on the planet, that's not going to happen by myself. But if I contribute one thing, if I make it easier for one person, if I help one company adapt to climate change better, or if I bring science closer to one company that was not considering it in their decision making, yes, I'm satisfied. I think this impact is an increment. Did you did you contribute a small increment to somebody else's life experience and vision? That is impact. They did not stay at the same place.
And in that context of solving this complex problem about energy transition and climate adaptation, that you very much is dear to you as I see how you're talking about it, the question from our previous interview was, how could we find a common language across disciplines that unite us?
I think that's a lovely and a super important question. And when I think about it, we already have one thing that's common to all of us, which is the fact that we are human beings. And by that we have a human experience, we have emotions. We are not work machines, we are not just animals, as I was saying earlier. And I think if we find a common ground, it needs to be through that. It needs to be through what we already have in common, which is the human experience. I think that's, and maybe that's cultural. I could imagine that in other cultures it's not so much the case, but certainly in the Western culture, the human aspect is more often than not in the background at work. We are as good and as worthy as we produce, as we grow, as we provide, as we shine. But ultimately, we are, regardless of who we are, the money we have, the position in the company, my CEO and I, we're both people. We were both born. We both have dreams. We both have fears. We both have passions. And if something unites us, that is it. And when I think also about climate change and climate adaptation, it's an interesting topic for that because the narrative around it is pretty negative. The narrative around it is we're in trouble, we're late to adapt, we need to do something, and yet we don't seem to be doing that. And I keep wondering constantly, how do we get people engaged? How do we reach people? And my biggest conclusion, I've been in science partly for that, I'm going to contribute to the science, I'm going to contribute to prove, to find solutions to this, to that. And then again, I realize, but not all the scientific papers or plots or figures or documentaries in the world will reach the person that does not want to hear that. And we will, even as climate change scientists, even criticize and dismiss the people that will not want to believe us. And we're going to talk about climate skepticism, and we're going to talk about people in denial and this and that, but what are we doing to get closer to them? We will tailor our content to the people that are already convinced. What's the point in doing that? And that goes back to, how do you then find the common ground that you have? And that's not going to be through your science. That's not going to be through your numbers. To me, that's going to be through the human experience.
So for you, the common language is actually the common ground through the human experience.
Yes. I think if you want to get a message across, it's your responsibility as well to speak the other person's language, because they did not ask for your message. If you want to get it across, it's on you to find the common ground, to see what will speak to them, and to talk that language.
What is the question that you have for the next one we will interview?
It is actually a follow-up on this question, because my take is what unites us, the common ground, is the human experience, is the emotion. But then the answer that I don't have is, how do we bring this emotion, how do we bring the human aspect back into the workplace, where we're used to operate not so much as humans, but as workforce.
Claudia, it's been such a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much for taking the time and for all your stories. Thank you.
Thanks to you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to be here.